This is my 300th video on YouTube, and in that time I have made many things. I've made tanks fly, fire come out of models, and I've lasered and printed multiple things and painted hundreds of models. But this video is going to be different. And recently I've had some ideas that would require me to have some certain set of skills in a certain area of our hobby corner. And this is casting, 3D printing, resin casting to be specific. However, this video is not about that at all, but I do have a story to tell you and the reason why this video came about in the first place. But let's be honest, this would be totally boring if I just did this with a face and no visuals, so let's start the video and I'll tell you the story during the video. This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and this video might not seem like the usual video if you are used to watching anything on my channel. Yes, what you are seeing right now is your dad using the fires of Mordor to make metal into a liquid. I will have to explain to you about that metal in a little bit, but I also need to explain to you the reason how we got to this point in the first place. However, this wouldn't be a Groundeffected video without a problem. So let's introduce our first problem. Let's try that again, shall we? So, as you can clearly tell, something like this is going to require a new set of skills which I'm going to have to learn all by myself. And I'm going to be totally honest with you, I learned most of this from watching TikTok. I hate to say it, but that is exactly how I learned to do these things. Now, I want to explain very importantly what this is. This is gold, and I have made a 14 karat gold alloy. That is when you mix gold, or in fact an alloy is when you mix any metals together, this creates an alloy of them. Now, what I want to say is that this gold I obtained because some absolutely crazy human being decided that the resin on my shelf with nice pretty colors painted on them is worth more than what I thought it was worth, and so they gave me some golden coins in trade of my models, which is a fantastic thing because now I can attempt to do the thing that I was attempting previous but never had the gold to do this with. Now, what I want to say is that working with metals is a whole new learning curve. I'm just going to put it very bluntly, and I'm probably not going to explain too much about what is going on in this video, mostly because I don't even know myself. And now would be a good time to introduce the second problem of this video, and that is I have no idea what I'm doing, so I made this metal so brittle that when I tried to bend it, it snapped, meaning I had to remelt it all over again, pour it, mill it, and that brought me back to the next step. And that is for me to take that metal that I had made into a nice wire and wrap it around what they call a mandrel, I think. That is then shoved into my drill and just bent. I'm not gonna lie, this hurts fingers. If you're doing this, you probably want to wear a glove. Now that I have rings the size that I need, I'm gonna cut them up, and while I cut them, I want to explain to you how this video came about in the first place. I really wanted to be able to learn how to do casting so I can use it for model making ideas that I have in the future. And what I did was reach out to a couple companies who do a castable resin that I can burn out and use molten metal to take its shape in. But these guys told me I needed experience. So this video is my proof of the experience that I have got working with metal. So hopefully you like this video a lot, because this video needs millions of views on it so that these companies can kick themselves in their own booties when they realize that they should have just sent me the bloody casting resin in the first place. Now back to the video. Once I have cut all those little links to the size that they need to be, which is a very complicated thing by the way, my rod or wire that I made was 2.8 millimeters in diameter, and I wrapped that around a 6mm mandrel, which is actually just one of the shelves from inside of my shop, and I cut that to make a mandrel. It's not very conventional, but it is a thing that I did. Once I had got those linked up to make what seems like a chain, I need to then warm it up again, because this is called annealing. And annealing the metal means that you make it a little bit softer. It's this whole chemical process with molecules and science and all sorts of stuff that happens. But basically, when it's soft enough, you can then twist those links closed, and you want to get them as closed as you can. Now, I did do this the first time around very nicely, but you will see how the universe does not care how nicely you do something. If you do it wrong, it will kick you in the teeth every time. It's just how the universe works. I soldered the links closed using a butane torch and some 14 karat gold solder paste that I bought, which was extremely expensive, by the way, and this was the only thing that I actually bought for this project, which kind of killed my pockets and the entire budget for this video. So please leave a like and a load of comments and share the video, for frickin' sake. This little tool thing that I'm using is just my Dremel, and on the Dremel I have attached this rotary polishing tool thing. I'm going to be totally honest, I don't know the exact name for this thing, but it's got loads of little fingers on it, and it comes in different grits, and you use it to polish things. Basically all I was doing was polishing off the little extra pieces of solder, and then it's time to anneal again, and this is probably the first footage that I'm actually showing of me annealing it at this time. However, I would like you to note that this video has got more problems in it, and here is another one of them. After spending an entire day making that wire, rolling the wire, breaking the wire, making the wire again, then re-rolling the wire, and then making it again, I was very upset about the fact that I had broken that link. But then I remembered that this is all part of the experience that I was meant to have when I was asking for that casting resin. So I just rolled it out again and did everything that I did up until this point all over again. And then I put it into my vise and twisted the chain link by link. And I'm going to be totally honest here. If you put a piece of charcoal between my butt cheeks while I was doing this, I would have pinched you a solid diamond. And since my butt was puckering so much during this process, I forgot to record when I annealed the chain, which I did twice, by the way, just to make sure that the metal was soft while I was twisting it, because that was the first mistake that I made when I snapped out of the chain. I had overcooked the metal, and that was a problem. If you're making a chain like this, by the way, one tip I can give you is to just over twist the chain. What we find is that when you make the chain, it wants to roll back on itself, and some people like to put it through the mill to flatten it, which in my opinion makes an ugly looking chain because it flattens it. If you want it to be rounded like mine looks, then you want to over twist slightly on the chain, and you will get it to stay nice and straight with the links when you hang it, at least to some certain extent. Now what I did after that was very questionable, because I used super glue to glue the golden chain onto a piece of wood. Now what you should do if you were a professional is use something called shellac resin, which I didn't have, nor could I even figure out which one I needed to buy, so I know how super glue works, and I'm not going to tell you how I got rid of it, but let's just say the fires of Mordor were involved, and I opened the back door and covered up my face as much as possible, because that is very dangerous. Do not do that, and please just get the shellac resin if you ever try to attempt something like this. What you may have also noticed is that I was using another piece of wood with some sandpaper that was strapped around it, which I had also super glued to that piece of wood, which I found completely destroyed the sandpaper, however was a lot smoother than my file. Obviously the file takes off a lot of the chunk, and then to shape it nicely I used the wood with the piece of sandpaper, and then I used my hands and curving my fingers over the top of it and kind of carving the shape that I wanted out of it. I gathered up all this dust, and I don't want to mention how stupid I was with this dust later on, but you won't get to see any of that, so I'll let you see me gathering it so that you think that I was able to gather it and I didn't lose any of the money, but I will be totally honest, I tried to melt it, and if anybody knows anything about this stuff, which I didn't know, by the way, you cannot melt the dust. The filings, keep that. You can melt that. If it's actual gold pieces and they're very small, they will melt. But if you make it dust by sanding it, do not try to remelt it. Doesn't work. I know this the hard way. And also there was lots of flying molten pieces of stuff going. I'm not going to talk about it, but you can watch me sanding this thing like my life depends on it. Now that the chain is shaped the way that I want it, it's time to play housewife and make a little bit of a thing called a pickle, which is essentially, I think, some form of a not so strong acid. And you make it inside there, and then you shove your chain inside of that thing in order to get all the fire scale off. And that fire scale, I'm not sure why it was on there at that point, but it was obviously on there, and so that's why I needed to pickle it. But while I left that in the pickle, usually it's about 10 minutes or so, but I find because I haven't got mine on heat, it takes a little bit longer, so I just leave it in while I'm doing what I'm doing next. I then melted some of the rest of the gold that was left over from making the chain, and then I flattened that in order to make now what they call a box clasp. This is the clasp that's going to keep the chain on together, because otherwise it is just a chain, and just a chain is useless. So what I did was I made sort of a square thing, which I then soldered onto a flat thing, which now made the bottom part of the box that I'm going to use for the clasp. And you can see me rolling out more of the stuff, because every time I made something, I would cut it out and then realize that I couldn't cut the next thing out of it because the piece was so small. So I have to take all those pieces that I cut off and go melt them again to flatten it again so that I can get another piece, and then cut it out the center of that, then take what's left of that and melt it again. It just kept happening like this. Also during this process, I somehow managed to snap my jeweler's bench thing. It was a very cheap one that I got for like $15 on Amazon, and I broke it. So I had to use a normal vise to hold my little jeweler's block thing, because it's really hard to cut this stuff on anything other than one of those things for some reason. Also, I learned a lot about measuring. As you may know if you've watched my channel, I do not like measuring things, because every time I measure, it never fits. So I feel like I just go by feel. At the end of the day, it is art after all, so it doesn't really matter. This piece that I'm annealing now is actually the little clicky piece that goes inside of the box, and I filed a place for it to fold a little bit easier. Unfortunately, by doing that, I weakened the metal, which was a stupid thing. What you can see is that I placed another piece of gold on the inside to hammer against it. This is to harden that piece of metal, but it was not hard enough. So later on, I added some solder to that area to make it a lot stronger, and then hardened it a little bit more by banging it with the hammer. I then filed that little clicky thing that goes inside of the other box to make sure that it was a super snug, tight fit. For some reason, if it doesn't stay too nice and tight, you might have it twist slightly and pull out, which is not good if you have some expensive metal wrapped around a body part. The next thing was to close up the box that I had first originally made, and that's pretty easy, and this is why I really like the solder paste, because I can just use it like glue, and then just have to use some fire to activate that glue and hope to bejesus that it doesn't melt the rest of it, because I was using a hard solder, which is means that it melts at a much higher temperature, and the temperature that it melts at is pretty close to melting the gold temperature, so I have to be very careful at this. I then filed that box nice and straight, and once I had got it to look kind of satisfactory, it's time to test whether that thing fits in and clicks. And thankfully, between my absolute horrible mess of measuring and some slight twinge of my artistic bone in one of my elbows, I managed to make it work. So now it is time for me to build a box that goes onto the back of the little clicky part, and then I can gently shape it to make it fit nicely with his other box cousin, and they can sit together looking very nice and boxy. At this point, I can also check whether they come apart and go back together again, because if they didn't, it would be bad. And with that most satisfactory of clicks, it is time for me to move on to cutting the chain to be able to fit onto these little box ends. So I'm going to use my vise to hold the chain and cut it as straight as I possibly can. And then I'm going to take those little box ends and making sure that they are orientated the correct way, because if they aren't, it would be a bad thing. And at this point, I'm going to use some easy solder. The only easy solder I have, however, is actual real solder, and it's not in paste form. And I'm not going to lie, this is a lot harder to do than the paste form. I really wish I could have more of the different pastes, and it would maybe make my life a bit easier for this, but they're too expensive, so I just used some slightly cheaper standard solder and just struggled my way through. Once I had got them basically glued onto the ends with solder, I can now come in and polish everything off to as high of a shine as I possibly dare to do using a Dremel. I'm gonna just warn you right now, if you use a Dremel to polish any kind of a chain, you are actually playing with fire. And I don't mean that it's going to be a little bit of a bad thing. I mean, this thing can kill you. Don't even try play games. You hold on to that chain like it honestly stole something from you. Because if that thing slightly catches it, it's going to rip off and it's going to go smacking you all over the face. And it's bad. Wear the goggles, and you probably want to wear some gloves. I didn't in this case because I couldn't feel the chain. And I felt like it's better for me to hold on for dear life than it was to just not even feel it. I then placed my chain into an ultrasonic to clear out all of that polish. As you can see, it is just being shaken off by the ultrasonic vibrations. When that's done, I can rinse it off with some just water, which is actually freezing cold because it's winter here in the UK. When I was done with that, I sprayed it with my airbrush only to get rid of all of the water, and I called it done. Now I know that this video was not a painting video, and maybe you didn't even make it as far as to hear me saying the next few words. But if you did make it this far, I hope that you found some inspiration in this video, in the fact that I overcame a thing that was a problem for myself. I wanted to learn how to use this material, and I wanted to learn how to use it to prove a point. And this video being my point, that I did in fact learn how to use the material. So if you are sitting on the toilet, make sure you wash your hands when you get up, and be sure to share this video with your gran. But before you go, let me just thank my Patreons, because genuinely I would not be here making a video every single week without them. And if you are interested in behind the scenes and seeing what's happening before it actually happens, then you might want to join my Patreon, because I share a lot more of my life over on there than I do on any other social media. And if you do join that, that will help keep the lights blinding my eyeballs and help me making more videos every single week. I have some awesome things coming up, so please stick around. Leave some words of whatever you want in the comments down below, because that does help the algorithm. And of course, we want to make sure that this video gets as big as possible, as a good massive f you to anyone who said no to me sending me some resin to make castable stuff. And please send me that stuff in the future. Please don't actually take the f you seriously. And if you didn't like this video, I don't care, f you too.